The snow fell gently on New York City, covering everything in a blanket of cold, crisp whiteness. I watched it from the back of my cab, feeling a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. Tonight was supposed to be special. It was our 20th wedding anniversary, and I had planned something truly memorable for Rachel, my wife. I had saved for months to buy her a diamond necklace, each stone symbolizing a year we'd been together. I wanted this gift to mark a new beginning, a rekindling of the love we had once shared. As I approached the restaurant, my heart was beating faster than usual. I was carrying a bouquet of white roses, Rachel's favorite. She had always been punctual, never late, so I wasn't surprised to see her standing near the entrance, holding a small gift bag. For a moment, I felt a surge of love and hope. Maybe tonight would be the start of something new. But then everything changed. A man I didn't recognize walked up to Rachel. He was tall, confident, and dressed sharply. At first, I thought he might be a colleague, someone she ran into by coincidence. But then he did something that made my world come crashing down. He pulled her close and kissed her. Not on the cheek, but on the lips. And the worst part, Rachel kissed him back, her arms wrapping around his neck, as if they had done this 100 times before. I stopped dead in my tracks. The roses slipped from my fingers and landed in the snow. I felt numb, like the winter chill had suddenly invaded my veins. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, watching as my wife, my Rachel, betrayed me in plain sight. I couldn't believe it. My first instinct was to storm over and confront them, to demand answers, but something inside me held back. I needed to think. I needed to understand what this meant and what I was going to do next. I turned away and walked back toward the street. As I got into another cab, my mind was already shifting from shock to anger, and then to something colder, more calculating. This wasn't going to end with tears and apologies. No, I was going to make her pay. I spent the ride back to our house in silence, staring blankly out the window as the lights of the city blurred past. My mind was a storm of emotions: anger, disbelief, betrayal. But amid the chaos, one thing became clear: I couldn't let this go. Not after 20 years of marriage. Not after everything I'd sacrificed for us. When I reached the house, I stood outside for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady myself. The cold air stung my face, but it also brought a sharp clarity that I desperately needed. I had to think rationally. I couldn't afford an impulsive confrontation that would let her twist things in her favor. She was too good at that, turning arguments around, making me feel like the unreasonable one. No, if I was going to confront Rachel, it had to be on my terms. Inside, the house was dark and quiet. I took off my coat, placed the diamond necklace back in its box, and put it deep in my office drawer. I wasn't going to let her have it. Not now, maybe not ever. I went straight to the liquor cabinet, poured myself a generous glass of whiskey, and sat in the dimly lit living room, thinking. Images of Rachel and that stranger flashed through my mind, their kiss replaying over and over. My mind began to sort through the past few months, piecing together every late meeting, every unexplained trip, every instance when she'd been distant or cold. It all made sense now. I had been too focused on my career, too confident in our marriage's stability, too blind to see what was right in front of me. I finished my drink and started to lay out my plan. The first step was obvious: a divorce. But not just any divorce. I wanted to destroy Rachel, to leave her with nothing. She had built her career with my support. Her comfort and lifestyle were because of me. Now I was going to rip it all away from her. I needed the best lawyer I could find. Someone ruthless. Someone who would make sure Rachel lost everything. I picked up my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. The next call was to a private investigator. I needed more information. Proof of her affair. Details about the man I'd seen with her. Everything I could use to ruin her reputation. I wasn't going to confront her without having all the ammunition I needed. I would wait, gather evidence, and then strike when she least expected it. As I lay in bed that night, I didn't feel sadness, just a cold sense of determination. Rachel had chosen her path, and now I was choosing mine. The next morning, I awoke with a headache from the whiskey and a bitterness that I couldn't shake. But beneath the pain, there was a sense of purpose. I was no longer the betrayed husband. I was a man with a mission. The first step was making a few important phone calls. I reached out to Richard Kane, a notorious divorce lawyer who specialized in high-profile, cutthroat cases. He had a reputation for leaving his clients' spouses in ruins. "David Thompson," I said when he answered. "I need your services, and I'm not interested in playing fair." Kane's tone was businesslike. "Let's meet in person. I need all the details." We arranged to meet at his office the following afternoon. I had barely hung up when the private investigator called back, confirming our arrangement. I gave him Rachel's phone number, email address, and a brief description of the man I'd seen her with. He assured me that he would have something for me within a week. I was moving quickly, and that suited me fine. I spent the next few days acting as if nothing had changed. I greeted Rachel in the mornings with a forced smile, continued our usual conversations about mundane topics, and even pretended to be interested in her work meetings. She remained oblivious, probably thinking I was too naive to ever suspect anything. In reality, I was watching her every move, searching for signs that could confirm what I already knew. She'd become more secretive lately, her phone always face down, her messages checked in another room. She'd suddenly begun working late again, with vague explanations that now seemed to be little more than lies to cover her tracks. I attended my meeting with Richard Kane, bringing him every piece of information I had gathered so far. Kane listened intently, occasionally taking notes. He looked up and asked, "Are you sure you want to go this route? This kind of divorce will get ugly fast." "Unsure," I replied. "I want her to suffer, to lose everything she values. Money, reputation, everything." He nodded slowly. "In that case, we'll need to dig deep. I'll handle the financial side. Asset protection, hidden accounts, anything we can use to leverage against her. But you need to be prepared for her to fight back. She won't give up easily." "I know," I said, leaning forward. "But neither will I." The private investigator delivered results faster than expected. A week later, I received a thick envelope filled with photos, emails, and a report detailing Rachel's affair. Her lover was a coworker, a regional sales manager named Mark Sanders. They had been involved for at least 6 months, meeting during business trips and in cheap motels across the city. I looked through the evidence, feeling a mix of rage and vindication. There were photos of them holding hands at a hotel entrance, entering a room together, and even a few blurry shots of them through a window. It was all the confirmation I needed. I carefully sorted the evidence and placed it in a separate folder for Kane. This was my insurance policy, my trump card. As I continued to collect evidence and build my case, I made sure to start subtly shifting our financial assets. I transferred funds from our joint accounts into one solely under my name, moved investments, and arranged for a significant portion of my income to be rerouted into a private account that Rachel wouldn't have access to. This was about power, about stripping her of any advantage she thought she had. When Rachel noticed the changes in our accounts, she casually brought it up over dinner one night. "Did you make some changes to our savings account?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, just some restructuring," I replied, feigning nonchalance. "Trying to maximize our returns. Nothing to worry about." She seemed satisfied with the answer and didn't press further. It was almost laughable. Really, she had no idea that her comfortable life was about to be turned upside down. I kept up the facade for weeks, acting as the loving husband while secretly orchestrating her downfall. It was a twisted game, but I was winning. I continued to play the role of the devoted husband, keeping up appearances while secretly setting everything in motion. Rachel had no clue about the storm that was brewing. She was busy with work, late-night meetings, and mysterious business trips. I pretended not to notice, but inside, I felt a burning sense of anticipation. My revenge was becoming more tangible, and I was determined to see it through. Rachel's attempts at affection became more awkward. She would kiss me on the cheek as she left for work, try to start small talk over dinner, or suggest we plan a vacation together. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was trying to mend the marriage she was actively destroying. Every fake smile and empty word only fueled my resolve. Then one night, I saw my chance to escalate things further. Rachel returned home later than usual, her hair slightly disheveled and makeup a bit smudged. I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book, when she walked in. She looked surprised to see me awake. "You're still up?" she asked. "Yeah," I replied. "Couldn't sleep. How was your meeting?" "It was fine," she said with a tight smile. "Just ran a bit longer than expected." I stared at her, my gaze cold and unwavering. "Is that all it was? Just a meeting?" Her face registered confusion, but there was a flash of fear in her eyes. She quickly composed herself. "Yes, David, just a meeting," she said, a bit too defensively. I shrugged, still staring at her. "I hope so," I said, my voice low, "because I'd hate to find out you've been lying to me." Rachel laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. "What's gotten into you? Why are you acting like this?" "I'm just tired," I replied. "Go to bed. We'll talk tomorrow." The uncertainty in her eyes told me that I had managed to plant a seed of doubt. That was enough for now. I knew she'd spend the rest of the night questioning herself, wondering what I might know. It was exactly the psychological edge I needed. The next day, I took another step in my plan. I started leaking information about Rachel's affair to some of our mutual friends. Nothing overt, just a few subtle hints. I knew that gossip would spread like wildfire. Rachel was well liked in our social circle, but people love to talk, especially when it's about someone else's scandal. It didn't take long before I heard whispers and saw knowing looks from friends at gatherings. I made sure to act oblivious, playing the part of the unsuspecting husband, while Rachel began to sense that something was wrong. She became more irritable, more paranoid. I could see it in the way she checked her phone constantly, how she tried to be overly cheerful at parties, how she avoided direct eye contact with me. At home, I made her life increasingly difficult. I'd deliberately leave her tasks undone, forget important dates, and make plans without consulting her. Every time she tried to confront me, I'd act confused or dismissive, which only deepened her frustration. I was gaslighting her, making her question her sanity. It was cruel, but it was also effective. Rachel's attempts to salvage our marriage became desperate. She proposed counseling, suggesting that maybe we needed a fresh start. I agreed to the idea, pretending to be hopeful, but in reality, I knew it would be another weapon in my arsenal. In therapy sessions, I painted a picture of a loving husband trying to fix a failing marriage, while subtly dropping hints about Rachel's infidelity. I wanted the therapist to see her as the unstable, dishonest partner. The counselor, a middle-aged woman with sympathetic eyes, fell for it. She started directing most of her advice toward Rachel, urging her to be more honest and open with her feelings. Rachel's frustration grew, and she began to unravel in front of my eyes. She became more defensive, her explanations more erratic. It was as if she knew the walls were closing in, but she couldn't figure out where the attack was coming from. As my plan continued to unfold, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. On one hand, I was finally seeing the woman who had betrayed me suffer the consequences. On the other hand, I couldn't ignore the fact that I was becoming someone I hardly recognized. Cold, manipulative, and obsessed with revenge. But there was no turning back now. A few more weeks passed, and my preparations were nearly complete. Rachel had no idea that I was ready to launch the final phase of my plan. I had everything lined up. Proof of her affair, financial maneuvers that would leave her stranded, and enough leverage to ensure that our divorce would leave her with nothing. I decided it was time to deliver the blow. That evening, I set up a romantic dinner at home, complete with candles, wine, and soft music. Rachel looked pleasantly surprised when she came in, clearly trying to grasp what was happening. "This is a nice surprise," she said with a hesitant smile. I poured us each a glass of wine. "I thought we needed a good night together. It's been a while since we've had a real conversation." She nodded, her eyes searching mine for answers. We sat down, and I kept the small talk going for a while. About work, the weather, anything but the storm that was about to break. Finally, as we finished dinner, I set my wine glass down and looked her in the eyes. "There's something I need to show you," I said, my voice steady. Rachel's face tightened. "What is it?" I stood up, walked over to the kitchen counter, and grabbed a manila envelope. I handed it to her without a word. She hesitated before opening it, then pulled out the photos, emails, and reports from the private investigator. I watched as her expression shifted from confusion to shock, and then to sheer panic. "Where did you get these?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That doesn't matter," I said coldly. "What matters is that I know everything, Rachel. I know about Mark. I know how long it's been going on. And I know how you've been lying to me for months." She looked like a deer caught in headlights, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to form a response. "David, please, let me explain. It's not what it looks like." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that surprised even me. "Of course, it's exactly what it looks like, Rachel. You're not even trying to deny it." Tears began to well up in her eyes. "David, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." I could feel my anger rising again, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Oh, you didn't want to hurt me. How noble of you," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You've had your fun, Rachel, but now it's my turn." The divorce papers were already prepared. I handed them to her next. "You'll find everything in order," I said. "I've taken measures to ensure that you walk away with the bare minimum. You'll have no access to our assets, no alimony, nothing." Rachel's face turned pale. "You can't do this, David. I have rights." "Not after what you did," I replied coldly. "I'm going to make sure that everyone knows about your affair. I've already started spreading the word among our friends, and I won't stop until your reputation is ruined." Rachel's tears finally broke through, and she began to sob uncontrollably. "David, please. I made a mistake. We can fix this." "There's nothing left to fix," I said sharply. "This marriage is over, and so is your comfortable life. You made your choice, and now you'll live with the consequences." She reached out, trying to grab my arm, but I pulled away. "Don't touch me," I said. "You disgust me." I left her there, sobbing on the floor of the living room, and walked upstairs to the guest room where I had been sleeping for weeks. I closed the door behind me, feeling a mix of triumph and emptiness. I had delivered the blow, and Rachel was finally facing the reality of what she had done. But instead of the satisfaction I'd hoped for, there was only a hollow feeling in my chest. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the revenge I'd sought was really worth it. But I quickly pushed those thoughts aside. This wasn't about feeling good. It was about making Rachel pay. And I wasn't done yet. The days that followed were nothing short of chaotic. Rachel's initial shock had turned into desperation as she scrambled to regain control of her rapidly collapsing world. She tried to contact Mark, but I had already ensured that he, too, felt the consequences. The private investigator had gathered enough dirt on him to send a clear message: stay away, or I would ruin his career as well. Mark took the hint and went silent, leaving Rachel even more isolated. Rachel attempted to reach out to our mutual friends for support, but my carefully placed rumors had already done their work. The same people who once welcomed her into their homes now kept their distance, offering only empty words or outright avoidance. I heard whispers through the grapevine. "Did you hear about Rachel?" Or, "I always thought she seemed too ambitious. She became a pariah almost overnight." I watched it all unfold from a distance, keeping my interactions with Rachel cold and minimal. She tried to reason with me, to negotiate some sort of settlement, but I refused to entertain her pleas. Instead, I directed everything through my lawyer, Richard Kane, who showed no mercy. He filed motions, froze assets, and used every legal tactic in the book to ensure that Rachel would walk away with almost nothing. One evening, I found Rachel sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a pile of bills. Her face was drawn and pale, a shadow of the woman I once knew. "David," she said quietly when she noticed me, her voice barely audible. "Can we just talk? Please, I have nowhere else to turn." I leaned against the doorway, folding my arms across my chest. "There's nothing left to talk about, Rachel. You made your choices. Now you're seeing the results." "I'm losing everything," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. I never thought it would end like this. I felt a surge of satisfaction. "That was always the plan," I said coldly. "You took everything from me when you betrayed me. Now I'm just returning the favor." She lowered her head, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Part of me wanted to feel pity, but I quickly suppressed it. This was the woman who had destroyed our marriage, who had lied and cheated without a second thought. I couldn't afford to let her vulnerability weaken my resolve. I left her there, alone at the table, knowing that she had no one left to turn to. The court proceedings were brutal. Rachel tried to claim some of our assets, citing years of marriage and shared sacrifices, but my legal team dismantled her arguments with ruthless efficiency. The evidence of her affair was used to paint her as the sole cause of our marital breakdown, a tactic that worked in my favor. The judge sided with me on nearly every issue. I retained the house, the majority of our savings, and even primary custody of our 2 children. The impact on Rachel was devastating. She was forced to move out of our home and into a small, cheap apartment. I made sure to keep her financial options limited. She lost access to our joint bank accounts, her credit was ruined, and even finding a job became difficult as rumors about her infidelity spread through her professional network. I had reached out to a few key contacts in her industry, ensuring that they were aware of her personal indiscretions. No one wanted to hire a disgraced marketing director with a reputation for scandal. Rachel's calls became less frequent over time, her voice growing increasingly desperate each time. She begged me to reconsider, to allow her some dignity in the settlement. But I ignored her pleas. She needed to feel the full weight of her betrayal. One day, I received a message from Rachel's sister, Allison. She was concerned about Rachel's mental state and asked if I could show some compassion. I read the message without any real emotion and deleted it. Compassion had no place here. Rachel eventually stopped trying to reach out. The last I heard, she was working a low-level sales job at a small company, barely making ends meet. The woman who once exuded confidence and charm was now a broken shell, fighting to survive each day. I should have felt victorious. I had taken everything from Rachel. Her reputation, her career, her comfort. I had orchestrated her downfall with precision, leaving her to pick up the shattered pieces of her life. But as I stood in the empty house that was once filled with laughter and warmth, I was struck by a hollow realization. The revenge I had sought had come at a price. I was alone, my life defined by bitterness, and a past I couldn't let go of. It had been 6 months since I'd confronted Rachel and initiated the divorce. I'd watched her life crumble, piece by piece, and I was now in full control. She was no longer the polished, successful woman I had once known. She was a desperate, struggling shell of herself, and it was exactly what I had intended. But my thirst for revenge was far from quenched. I wanted to take this further. Rachel had taken more than just my trust. She had taken my sense of self-worth. I needed her to experience a complete loss, one that extended beyond material things and reached into her very soul. Rachel's presence in our social circles was already a distant memory. I made sure to isolate her even further, reaching out to remaining contacts who might have shown her sympathy. I told them exaggerated stories of her betrayal, ensuring that no one felt pity for her. By the time I was done, she was effectively exiled from every part of her former life. But I knew there was still one place where she felt safe: her relationship with our two children, Sarah and Jacob. While I had won primary custody, Rachel still had visitation rights. She made the most of her limited time with them, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. For the kids, seeing their mother so broken was confusing and painful. I had tried to keep them out of it as much as possible, but they were smart enough to sense the hostility between us. One Saturday morning, as Rachel arrived to pick up the kids for a scheduled visit, I decided to strike the final blow. I opened the door and blocked her from entering. "You're not taking them today," I said coldly. Rachel's eyes widened in shock. "David, please, don't do this. The children need to see me." "No, Rachel," I replied, my voice harsh. "They don't need to see you like this. You're a mess, and I won't let you drag them down with you." Tears filled her eyes, but she tried to stay composed. "You can't keep them from me. I have rights." "Your rights are conditional," I shot back. "And right now, you're not fit to be around them. You're barely holding yourself together." She began to plead, her voice breaking. "David, they're all I have left. Please don't take them away from me." I stood my ground, unyielding. "You should have thought about that before you destroyed this family." Rachel was visibly devastated. Her shoulders slumped and her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm begging you, David. Let me see my children." I simply shook my head. "Not today." As I watched her walk away, broken and defeated, I felt a surge of twisted satisfaction. I had taken the last thing she cared about, the last piece of happiness she had left. Over the next few weeks, I started working on a legal case to strip Rachel of her visitation rights entirely. I claimed that her mental state made her unfit to be around the children, providing statements from therapists I had manipulated and false testimonies from friends I had influenced. The strategy worked. The judge ruled in my favor, significantly reducing Rachel's access to Sarah and Jacob. When she received the news, Rachel tried to fight back. She filed appeals and hired new lawyers, but it was a losing battle. I had more resources, more connections, and a ruthlessness that she simply couldn't match. By the end of the process, Rachel was left with a mere 2 supervised visits a month. The kids didn't understand why their mother was suddenly absent from their lives. They asked me why she couldn't be there for birthdays, school events, or even simple dinners. I offered them vague explanations, telling them that their mother needed some time to sort things out. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was close enough. Despite the victory, a gnawing emptiness settled in me. I had achieved everything I'd set out to do. Rachel's career was ruined, her finances decimated, her social life non-existent, and now her children were nearly taken from her. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I felt hollow. One evening, as I was sorting through some old family photos, I came across a picture of Rachel and me, taken during happier times. It was from a vacation to Maine, a trip that now felt like a lifetime ago. We were both smiling, carefree, and in love. I stared at the photo for a long time, unable to reconcile the faces in the picture with the reality of who we had become. A part of me wondered if the person I had become was any better than the one I had tried to destroy. My own life had become consumed by anger and a drive for vengeance, leaving little room for anything else. The relationships I had once cherished, my children, friends, even colleagues, had all taken a backseat to my obsession with punishing Rachel. I thought about the kids, how they seemed to be growing distant, how they were starting to withdraw into themselves. I wondered if they would one day resent me for what I had done, or if they already did. The next day, I received a call from Rachel's sister, Allison, again. Her voice was heavy, as if she were carrying a burden. "David, I need to talk to you." "It's about Rachel," she said. "What about her?" I asked, my tone flat. "She's not doing well," Allison continued. "She's been talking about not wanting to live anymore." I felt a strange tightening in my chest. I wasn't sure if it was guilt, regret, or just the realization that I had pushed things to the brink. "What do you want me to do about it?" I asked, trying to sound indifferent. "Please, David," she pleaded. "She's still the mother of your children. Don't you care, even a little?" For the first time, I was at a loss for words. I had built my revenge with such precision, but now I was confronted with the very real possibility that I had gone too far. I had wanted Rachel to suffer, but I had never intended to push her to the edge of her own existence. I hung up the phone, unsure of what to feel. Was this the end I had wanted all along? Or was it just the ultimate consequence of a plan built on anger and hate? Rachel's world had been systematically dismantled, but the final stages of my plan were still underway. I wanted to ensure that the ruins of her life were as permanent as they were devastating. Even though I had stripped her of money, reputation, and access to our children, I felt compelled to complete the totality of my revenge. Rumors of Rachel's mental breakdown had begun to spread, mostly thanks to strategic leaks I'd arranged among former colleagues and friends. It was well known that she was struggling emotionally, but I made sure the narrative painted her as unstable, unpredictable, and a danger to herself and others. It was all part of my design. To make Rachel a public disgrace, ensuring she could never recover the life she'd once known. Then came the final step. Her job. The small company where she worked was the last remaining source of stability in her life, a modest position that barely allowed her to make ends meet. I knew someone on their board of directors, an old business acquaintance who owed me a favor. It didn't take much persuasion for him to start pushing the idea that Rachel's personal life was a liability to the company. Within a month, she was fired. When she found out, she tried calling me, leaving a desperate voicemail filled with sobs and pleas for mercy. I listened to it once, then deleted it without hesitation. Mercy was not part of my plan. There was nothing left to say to her. In the weeks that followed, I rarely thought about Rachel. I focused on work, my children, and maintaining the life I had carefully constructed without her. But there was an undeniable sense of emptiness that lingered in the background. I had won the battle, but the victory felt hollow. I had sacrificed too much of myself to achieve it, and the price had been higher than I anticipated. I was sitting in my office one afternoon when I received a call from Sarah's school. She had been caught fighting with another student, lashing out unexpectedly. It was unlike her, and I felt a surge of guilt as I realized how much the divorce and my relentless pursuit of vengeance had affected her. I drove to the school, picked Sarah up, and tried to talk to her on the way home. "What happened, Sarah? Why did you get into a fight?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "I miss Mom," she said quietly. "I don't understand why she can't be here." I felt a lump in my throat. I had anticipated Rachel's downfall, but hadn't fully considered the damage it would cause to our children. "I know it's hard," I said, trying to sound reassuring, "but things will get better." "No, they won't," Sarah shot back. "You hate her. You're the reason she's gone." Her words cut deep. It was the first time she had expressed such raw anger toward me, and it made me question everything I had done. I had focused so much on making Rachel suffer that I had overlooked the collateral damage. The children were paying the price for my revenge, and I couldn't ignore that anymore. The following week, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Rachel. The handwriting was shaky, the paper smudged with tear stains. I hesitated before opening it, unsure of what she could possibly have left to say. The letter was short, but filled with emotion. "David, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I won't ask for it. I just want you to know that I'm truly sorry. I know I hurt you deeply, and I know that's why you've done all this. I never meant to destroy everything, but I understand that it's my fault. I'd lost everything, my job, my friends, and my children. I have nothing left, David. I hope that gives you some peace. I'm leaving New York. I can't stay here anymore. I wish you well, and I hope you can find happiness. Rachel." I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and set it aside. I felt a strange sense of finality, as if a chapter of my life had truly come to an end. But there was no peace, only a deep, unrelenting emptiness. I had succeeded in driving Rachel out of the city, out of our lives, but it hadn't brought the satisfaction I'd expected. A few months later, I received another call from Rachel's sister, Allison. This time, her voice was different, calm, but with a hint of urgency. "David, I think you need to know. Rachel, she tried to take her own life. She's in a hospital in Chicago." The news hit me like a punch to the gut. I sat in stunned silence, unable to process the words. Rachel had reached the absolute bottom, and I was responsible for pushing her there. I had wanted to destroy her, and now I'd nearly succeeded in a way I never intended. I thought back to the times when Rachel and I had been happy, when we built a life together based on love and trust. Those memories felt like a distant dream, overtaken by the darkness of betrayal and revenge. I wondered if I had been right to pursue this path, or if I had simply become consumed by the worst parts of myself. I struggled with the decision of whether to visit her in the hospital. In the end, I chose not to go. Rachel had made her choices, and so had I. There was no going back. The life we'd once shared was beyond repair. Months later, I stood on the balcony of my empty house, looking out over the city skyline. The lights glittered below, a reminder of the world that kept moving, indifferent to personal tragedies. I had achieved my goal. I had ruined Rachel's life beyond repair. But as I stood there, I couldn't escape the feeling that I had also ruined my own. I had won the war, but I had lost my soul in the process. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care,